And now, the big plants, the Gymnosperms and the Angiosperms. In this lecture, please be able to diagram a seed, be able to label parts of a seed and a flower, define and compare angiosperms and gymnosperms, be able to place these two things on an evolutionary context with other plants and, while you're at it, with the other organisms they lived with, and give examples of angiosperms. There are plenty. We are talking about seed plants. What do we know about seed plants? Well, the sporophyte is dominant. The gametophyte is very, very reduced in this. We'll see how reduced in a few. Seed plants have vasculature. They have seeds, and specifically among the angiosperms, they have fruit. The seed protects the growing sporophyte, and we're going to look at the two major classes of seed plants, the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. What are seeds, though? The seed is a method to get an offspring all the resources it can have and disperse it as far away as a plant can. A seed comes from the fertilization of a megaspore. That megaspore is found in the megasporangium, which is a multicellular sporangium. Remember, plants have multicellular sporangia. The pollen grain that's going to fertilize it is made in the microsporangium, which is not shown here, but you can think about the pine cones that have the pollen or the flower parts that have the pollen that has the microsporangium. The pollen grain creates a sperm nucleus. That's right, the gametophyte is the pollen grain, creates a gamete, the sperm, and that's going to fertilize the egg, which is the gamete of the female gametophyte. This fertilization creates a zygote, or here, embryo, which is given a food supply within the seed, and the seed coat is going to protect that food supply and keep it from drying out, allowing the embryo the best chance at life. And this best chance is an adaptation that has made the seed plants incredibly successful. The sporophyte gets a competitive advantage when it begins developing. A spore is very small, but a sporophyte is comparatively enormous. Seeds also allow for a certain level of dormancy, and we're going to look at plant hormones that actually help break or create this dormancy. And the seed, of course, has a seed coat, which is protection from the elements and protection even from the guts of animals. An adaptation here is a pollen grain instead of a spore. The pollen grain is the male gametophyte, and it's going to travel in the air or on an animal for great distances, which allows plants to fertilize other plants that they can't even see. The ovule is part of a plant that contains the female gametophyte, and these are specialized parts of the plant to receive pollen grains. The gametophyte can be very small, even reduced to a few cells. Only 7 cells are used for the female gametophyte in the angiosperms. The gymnosperms. These are also known as naked seeds. They do not produce fruit. They have a multicellular female gametophyte, as we saw in the pine cones earlier. They have a multicellular male gametophyte, which is going to be your pollen grain, which has 2 cells. Yes, 2 cells counts as multicellular here. They have very large sporophytes, such as Douglas fir, which you can see all around, we'll take a close look at momentarily. Seed plants have seeds, yes. They are also, the cycads and conifers are also types of gymnosperms, as well as some more rare plants like Welwitschia that you may look at briefly in your book. Gymnosperms evolved in the Permian when times were dry, and this is a lot of adaptations of these plants are holding in water and protecting their water. So we'll see that they are adapted to very dry climates. A local example of the gymnosperms is Pseudotsuga menzicii, the Douglas fir, planted here as part of a tree plantation because it is a major local crop. This is a canopy species that survives in the canopy but cannot replace itself when it is being grown. It cannot grow in its own shade. It is very fast growing when it actually goes into the sun, though, and it is drought resistant, preferring dry and sunny slopes, especially around the Pacific Northwest. What is a flower? A flower is a bunch of modified leaves and contains the microsporangium and megasporangium. The microsporangium is contained in the anther, held aloft by the filament. The megasporangium is contained in the ovule, which is held in the ovary. The style and stigma are also parts of the carpel, along with the ovary, and these are going to ensure the delivery of pollen to the ovule. We also have petals, which are modified leaves that are colorful and can attract pollinators, and sepals, which are also leaves that are present here on the flower. A fruit is a thickened ovary wall that will enclose the seeds. There are many different forms of fruit, and we're going to look at some of these in lab. They can increase the seed dispersal. Some of these fruits are able to take the wind and be able to be blown great distances, thus moving the seeds. Coconuts are able to ride the waves. Some plants just catapult their seeds farther away with fruit that will actually dry out and explode. And of course, you have fructivores, animals that are capable of eating fruit, and, well, does a bear poop in the woods? If it does, it's probably dispersing seeds. Angiosperms are noted for their flowers and their fruits, but the early flowers looked nothing like the flowers of today. They had carpels and stamens just on the same branch, but didn't have much in the way of petals. The modification of leaves to petals came later, and you can see this in early plants such as water lilies. The ovule growth was able to change this into a fruit, and that was going to increase the dispersal. Angiosperms evolved in the Jurassic and became widespread through the Cretaceous. You can see here a phylogeny where the most ancient plants are the magnolia, the lauraceae, the water lilies, and a plant known as Aristolochia. These are the older kind of plants, and from them evolved the major groups, the monocots and the dicots. The monocots are a monophyletic group that includes things such as lilies, orchids, and grasses. Some examples of that would be daffodils, vanilla, and corn. The dicots are pretty much everything that's not the monocots, making it a paraphyletic group when you include magnolia, but a monophyletic group when you call it the eudicots and start with buttercups. These are going to contain the cherries and apples of the Rosaceae, or rose family, the rhododendron and the blueberries of the Ericaceae, and the sunflowers of the Asteraceae, which we know as the daisy family. Our local plant of interest is the rhododendron, our state flower. Rhododendron macrophyllum is a huge plant when you let it grow that large. It has leathery leaves, each of which lasts 2 years. It still does lose its leaves, but it waits 2 years, making it technically an evergreen plant for this evergreen state. It does live in the understory and thrives in the shade. Although it produces fruit, they are definitely not edible, and the plant itself is somewhat poisonous.